Hi, my name is Alex Riviere. I am a senior front-end developer for NextCore Food Safety Technologies. We are rewriting our entire front-end in Vue. I'm also the Atlanta Vue.js meetup organizer in town. And so I really like Vue. Those are my qualifications. I've been using Vue for many years. And we're going to talk about Vue for you lovely React developers. And hopefully y'all will take something away from this. Now, my slides have an epic amount of code. Lots and lots of code. So if you feel like you're having trouble reading it up on the screen, feel free to get the slides at this QR code and you can thumb through at your own pace. There's about 39 slides. There we go. There are 39 slides that I'm going to go through in the next 45 minutes. So we'll start talking about React, right? We all know React, and we all know that React is popular. Now, here's the interesting thing. The reason why React is popular is because React is popular. Maybe it was in the right place at the right time. Maybe it was the scrappy team of underdog developers, just making the tool the best that they possibly could. Maybe it was the mega corporation with billions of dollars behind it and a marketing team. I don't know what made it popular, but React is popular. And because React is popular, companies were like, oh, we should hire React developers. And then you get people going like, oh, people are hiring React developers. Well, I should learn React. So then companies go, there are so many React developers. We should hire React developers. And so suddenly there's more jobs for React developers. And it's an endless cycle. That's where we are today. I'm not saying that React is the best framework, but if you're using it, good job. I have my qualms with it, as you'll soon discover. But let's talk about people's perception of Vue, specifically React developers. Now, this tweet was from a year ago, well over a year ago at this point, and Anthony Fu is one of the developers for Nuxt, which is a Vue full stack framework similar to Next.js. He also implements a lot of stuff within the community and ecosystem for Vue. Very prolific guy, quite honestly, don't know how he does all of it, but he does a lot. And he put this question up on Twitter, which is basically like, hey, why don't y'all want to use Vue? Right? Sort of the question. And I've heard this question multiple times over the years. And ultimately, whenever somebody asks this question, the responses break down into what, fortunately, someone put all in one tweet for me, so I don't have to get a whole bunch of tweets, is this list here. Node.jsx, the ecosystem/tooling, readability, and jobs, right? So let's go through that list, because I have a few issues with that list. We'll start, and we'll go backwards through this list, right? So we'll start with jobs, right? Now, as I said before, React is popular because React is popular. It creates this cyclical thing of needing jobs. There are definitely more React jobs than there are Vue jobs. No questions asked, hands down, definitely more React jobs than there are Vue jobs. Not going to even attempt to deny that, right? There's no point, it's the truth. When I was looking for jobs recently, I was like, I might have to learn React really well in order to get a job because there's not very many Vue jobs. Not gonna lie. The next one, readability. This is a subjective thing. What you think is readable, I think, looks like a syntax error. So, readability is completely a subjective metric, and I will not hold it against anybody if you think that a Vue template is less readable than JSX. Because I feel the exact reverse, right? And that is a subjective thing. I cannot quantify that one because that is a personal preference. So I'll let you have that one, right? I'll let the React devs in the room have that one. If you like JSX better than Vue templates, that's fine. Ecosystem/tooling. While the React community may have a larger ecosystem, we don't the Vue ecosystem is actually very well supported. We have a lot of tools. We have a lot of the things that you have in the React community. The thing about the Vue ecosystem is that we don't need like 80 or 90 different libraries to handle your CSS, right? Like there's one way. You put it in a style tag and you move on with your life. And you don't have to argue about like, are we using emotion? Are we using feelings? Are we using like whatever framework of the week it is that everybody's wanting to use, right? We don't care. We don't care. We put it in a style tag and Vue handles it. And if you want to use Sass, you put it in a style tag, you set lang equals SCSS, and you have Sass, right? There's one way to do it. We do it that way. We move on with our lives. Also, to talk about ecosystem and tooling, y'all have a very vibrant ecosystem, lots of tools, well-supported tools like Create React App, right? It's very well supported. The docs point to it still, right? Right. Okay, how about this? In the Vue ecosystem, Evan Yu started making a new tool that was going to be similar to Create React App, yeah, and it was going to be just for Vue, and he started making it, and he came up with a really clever name for it because it was really fast. It's called Vite. Anybody hear of that? Anybody as a React developer using that? Wow, a lot of no-heads. That's amazing. Yeah. Guess what? You can just make a new React project with Vite because the Vue ecosystem has started making stuff that works for other ecosystems. So our ecosystem is actually powering parts of yours. You're welcome. So the last one that was on that original list is this. This makes me angry. This makes me furious, actually, because it is wrong. Not only is it wrong, it is like just straight up completely wrong. It has been wrong for years. Like this isn't like, oh, we just got this in the last 6 months. No, look at that. The first time that we could use JSX was in 2016. It has been 6 years that we can do this. And people are still saying that Vue doesn't have JSX. And it frustrates me to no end because it is false, it is patently false, and people keep saying that this is the truth. So, we're going to convert a React component to a Vue component with JSX. And then maybe y'all will stop complaining about it. So, to do that, we're going to have to make an app. We're going to make a to-do app because everybody knows how to make a to-do app. In fact, I am pretty sure as front-end developers, we have all attempted to make a to-do app at some point in our life because we were like, I can do it better. I have, don't worry. So the things that we need in our to-do app are we need to be able to store an array of to-do items. We need to be able to mark items as done and have them disappear. And then we need to be able to have a toggle that'll allow us to show the ones that we've finished versus the ones that we haven't finished, right? We need to be able to show the archived ones. So here is the React version of our application, right? And we're going to go through it real quick, don't worry. I've had some other React developers help me with this one, and you'll notice as we go through that I am not a React developer. It'll show up pretty quickly, don't worry. So the first thing that we have is that we're importing useState. We import our CSS into our JavaScript for some reason. And then we're going to have a little helper function here that I make. Now, this helper function, all this does is that it allows us to create a new to-do item with a unique ID, right? Because when we're looping over things, we need to have a key for that ID, for that to-do item that is unique. So this is going to automatically increment and give each one a unique ID. I'm not using any sort of backend. I'm not even putting this in local storage. As soon as you refresh the page, everything disappears. So this is just a helper function that when we say, hey, give me a new to-do, this is what it's doing. So here's the first indication that I am not a React developer. I'm using the function keyword because I like it. So we have our app component, and inside of it, we're going to store two pieces of state. We have our to-dos And update to-dos, once again, you can tell I am not a React developer because I have named things incorrectly. Y'all like what set to-dos is what it should be. Yeah, I call it update to-dos because we're updating the to-dos. And then similarly, we have show archived and update show archived. So outside of my poor naming of things in a non-standard way, deal with it. So we're tracking an array of to-do items, and we're tracking a Boolean as to whether or not we want to show the archived things. Great. We're going to make a function that takes in a string, and we are going to get our new to-do item with that string, and then we are going to update our to-do list and spread out the original to-do list, and then put the new one at the end, right? So this is how we're updating and adding a new to-do item. Next, what we're going to do is that we're going to make a function that allows us to mark a to-do item as being done, right? In order to do that, first we're going to take the to-do item that we are passing in. We're going to say, hey, .done, that is now true. And then we're going to find the index of that to-do item in our array of to-do items. We're going to spread it back into itself so that it's a new reference, right? Because y'all do weird things with referenced objects. And then we're going to update to-dos by spreading the array back into the array. So we're spreading the object into itself and then spreading the array back into the array so that everything's happy. Great. Next up, when we want to make a new to-do list, we're going to use a submit event. Now, I'm going to take a second here because I got to explain something to you because you're React developers. So there's this HTML element called a form element, and it has a submit event. And it allows you to put a bunch of inputs in one thing and press a button, and they all emit at the same time. If you haven't learned about this element, you should go read up on it. It's very useful, okay? I know that y'all love your divs, but we're going to use a form element. And so in order to handle that submit, I told you I was going to troll you for the next 45 minutes. I've tried to warn you. So first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to get that event, that submit event, we're going to prevent the default. Because the default for a submit event is that it's going to try to go to a different page. We don't want that, because then we'll lose all of our to-do items. So we're going to prevent that. And then we're going to get our form data. So form data is a built-in thing in the browser where you can give it a form, and it'll give you an object that then you can just get the inputs off of it by their name. So, okay, sorry, hold on, I have to. So in HTML, inputs have an attribute called name, where you can give it a unique name, and then you can reference it later by that name, right? Once again, I know that y'all really love binding data values to inputs, and you don't have to. Okay, back to it. So now we can say formStuff.get with our item, right? And that'll give us our string. We pass that to add to do, which will update our to-do list. And then we will do e.target, which is our form, and we'll do .reset, which resets the form back to its initial state. So form elements have a method on that. You get it. Okay, cool. So this is really good. We will never look at this function again because guess what? It works in React and it works in Vue. We don't have to change this. This is perfect. We're never going to look at this again. So remember that for later. Anyway, next up, we have our templating language part. I said it. JSX is a templating language. Fight me. You got it. It's not JavaScript. You can't put this in a browser and have it work. It has to go through a build step. It's a templating language. Anyway, so this is our rendering part of the thing with the templating language. And there's a few parts that I want to look at, like, for instance, our form. Remember, I told you about form elements? Great. So we have a form, and we give it an onSubmit attribute so that it knows that it needs to listen to the submit event. And we pass it our handleSubmit function. And then we give it a class name. Instead of just using the word class, we give it a class name of add item so that we can style it the way that we want to. We have a label with HTML4 rather than just 4 because, and it's going to say new to do in there, and then that label is going to reference our input of item. And then we have a button. Sorry. So in HTML, there's an element called a button that you can use instead of a div when you want somebody to like click on a thing and have it do stuff. And it has all of these great semantics built into it and everything. But by default, the button element is automatically type submit, right? So anytime that you use a button element inside of a form, by default, it is type submit. So you're able to hit enter while you're inside of the form, and it'll automatically submit. You can press the button, and it'll automatically submit. If you want a button that is in a form that is not type submit, you can go button type equals button, and it'll stop submitting. It won't attempt to submit the form. So if you're ever working with something where you have like a bunch of filters or something, and you're needing to have like an okay for the filters to like filter a select, complex select thing that's inside of a form, make sure that those are type button and not the default. I say that because I literally ran into that within the last 2 weeks, and I had to explain it to someone. Anyway, so we have our button. So this whole form just sort of works on its own, right? You type in something, you hit enter, and we get a new to-do item. Next up, we're going to have a checkbox, and it's going to be an input of type checkbox. We're going to listen for the change event, and when it changes, we're going to update show archived, which I think just changes the value. I don't know that I actually went over that function, but it's a function that basically just changes what, oh no, update, it's the, because I didn't name it set show archive. Right, that's why. We're all confused, it's great. So then we're going to have check to be bound to the current value of show archived, and it's going to be labeled with show finished, because my naming is wildly inconsistent. Next up, we have a list. In HTML, you know what? You'll figure it out. So we're going to have a list. It's an unordered list. We're going to filter our to-do list by whether or not we're wanting to show the archived ones, right? And then we're going to map over them so that we return a list item for each one. Each of those list items theoretically should have a key on them. They do. Key equals to-do ID. And then we're going to have a button inside of each list item that when you click it, it will mark the current to-do as done and re-render things, right? But we're only going to show that button if we are not showing the archived ones, right? I don't want to click that button. I don't want that button to be there if we've already archived it, because I'm a perfectionist and I never screw anything up and I never have to unarchive anything ever. Then we're going to have, it'll say for screen readers mark done, and then we'll list the ID and the to-do item. And then we export it so that we can use it, right? Can we all agree, React developers, that this is a React to-do list? Yeah? Cool. Here it is in action. So this is what it looks like. I forgot to mention earlier, I'm a handwritten font connoisseur, so I don't apologize for the fonts that I'm using. I might apologize for the number of fonts that I'm using, but not the ones that I'm using. So in this to-do list, we can then type in something. We can be like, eat more cheese, right? And it will add it to the list. We have our nice little checkbox, and then I can check it, and it goes away, and then I can click this, and it shows it again, right? It's a to-do list. We've made it. Ta-da! Yay. You can find it here on the internet if you want to, for some reason. Cool. All right. So we now have our React app that we can all agree is a React app. We need to turn it into Vue. Let's do that step by step, shall we? So the first thing that's going to happen is this import statement up at the top. You remember this import statement up at the top changes a little bit when we're using Vue because we don't have something called useState. Instead, we have a few things. One, I am not using the Vue version of JSX. I'm going to use the React version of JSX because I am a madman. There is a Vue version of JSX. It's better for Vue than what I'm using, but like I said, we're just gonna do it this way. So you set at the top at JSX H. What that means is rather than using react.createElement, when JSX compiles, it will instead use the function called H. H is the function that is provided by Vue in order to do the exact same thing as react.createElement. You pass it a thing, you pass it its options, the signature is the same, so it just works. Then we're going to import H so that we have that available. We're also going to import define component, ref, reactive, and computed. These are 3 different types of reactivity things, and we'll get into all of them very shortly. We're also going to import our CSS into our JavaScript. Once again, y'all, seriously. Okay, so next up, we're going to skip our new to-do item because I covered that already. We're going to change this definition a little bit here. So before we were just defining a function. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to have const app equals define component with a function. What this does is that define component checks to see what's coming into it as the argument, and then goes and will wrap it the correct way that it needs to. In Vue, we don't have a render function that we just return. The way that we're doing it this way, we're returning a setup function. The setup function runs once. This is very important to remember because in React, every time it runs, right, it's going to run the entire function. In Vue, it runs that setup function once, and then it will run its render function every single time. So already we're decreasing the amount that runs every single time that you want to render the component. We're only running the render part. Next up, we're going to change these 2 lines here. This will change a little bit, and you'll see why in a second, because we're going to go over it. It's going to become, we have to-dos is going to be a reactive object, which we just set as an array. What reactive does is that it takes whatever complex object that you want as a parameter and wraps it in a proxy. The way that Vue's reactivity system works is that the proxy will intercept get and set values, or in this case, because of an array, it'll also intercept push, pop, shift, unshift, map, whatever, right? It'll intercept all of those. Anytime that you access a value, if you have told Vue, I want you to track the values that are accessed by this function, it will track every single time that you get a value from one of these proxied values. When you then set a value on one of those proxied values, it will call every function that it has tracked that relates to that proxied thing. So in our case, with the array, anytime that we push a new to-do onto it, it'll call the render function again, right? Does that make sense? The easier way to refer to it as Vue magic, ooh, and then sort of wave your hands and move on. The other thing that changes is that instead of having a set state thing, we're going to use ref for show archive. Now, with reactive, I told you it's complex objects. So you can use object, you can use array, set, map, whatever, right? Anything that's an object. But you can't use a Boolean, right? You can't use primitive values. You can't use Boolean, you can't use string, you can't use number. You can't use anything that is not an object. And so what ref is that ref is essentially a reactive object that has one property called value. So when we want the value of show archived, we're going to do show archived dot value, and that'll be a Boolean. Make sense? Cool. All right. So we're also going to add a thing here. Now, we didn't have this in React land because we kind of did this inline, but we're going to use a computed value here. So the computed value is a way to create a ref, right? It's going to result in an object that has a dot value. And that dot value is going to be whatever's inside the function you pass to it. So in our case, we're going to do our filtering of whether or not the to-dos that are in the list are done yet or not based on what we're wanting to show. So that's all that filtered to do is, and every time that we update either show archived or we update our to-do list, this value will automatically update. So we're not having to go, it'll automatically trigger reactivity, right? Because once again, this is a function, view tracks all of the functions. Ta-da, magic. All right, computed is really cool because you can also create a getter for it. So you can be like, oh, I'm gonna have like a magic thing that does fancy things when you set it, or this is a getter, you can make a setter for it. So you can do like fancy things when like you set values, you can be like, I'm gonna trigger a bunch of other things too. The caveat with computed values, so that you know, they are cached. So if you have the same set of values, it will potentially cache everything and not call it again. So the thing not to do in this case is don't call API endpoints inside of a computed value. You should use like watch or watch effect or something like that if you're needing to track something and then call an API. That is the one caveat. Don't do things that may or may not be deterministic. Cool. All right, moving on. So this is our old add to do function, right? We all remember this, right? We have to spread the array into our update to do's function. This changes a little bit. We just push it onto the array, right? Because it's an array, so we can use array functions, and it'll trigger reactivity, because magic. This one's my favorite, is the mark done function. So remember we had to do all this stuff. We had to like find the index of the thing and then like spread it out and then do the thing, right? So in Vue, it looks like this. We just set the Boolean, because it's proxies all the way down, right? Like if you have an object in an array, well, that object becomes a proxy. So you have an array with a proxied array with proxied objects with values, and so it's tracking all of that. So we just set the value of the to-do to being done, and that triggers a re-render. We're skipping the handle submit. So this is the next area that changes a little bit. So you remember, I told you, we've passed it a setup function. So everything that we've done so far gets run once. It gets defined, it gets run once. So this has to not return JSX, it has to return a render function. So instead of returning JSX, you just have it return a function. Everything else pretty much stays the same. The couple of things that change are this checkbox here, right? We can't update show archived, set show archived, y'all would say. We instead have to set the value of show archived to be the opposite. The other thing that changes a little bit are these couple of lines here. Part of it is what changes is that we want to make sure that we're using the dot value for show archived. But if you remember, this line here looks real familiar. Do you know why it looks real familiar? It's because we made a computed value earlier. So instead of using todos.filter, we use filtered todos.value.map, because filtered to-dos will automatically update based on the reactive values that we're using inside of it, because Vue magic, and it knows to track things. All right, cool. Great, this is now a Vue application. Ta-da! So what have we learned? One, you can in fact use JSX, a templating language, with Vue. You can use it. There is a Vue version that allows you to use more Vue features, which are like directives and stuff like that, I think, that handles a lot of sort of like the slight differences between Vue and React a little bit better. Vue uses reactive objects for state. We have the two main ones are ref and reactive. You can also make computed values that use other reactive values to generate things. And Vue returns a render function instead of just JSX. So those are the big main differences between React and Vue as far as like how things work. Now here's the thing. If you came to me in a code review with this as a Vue component, I would flag it as like request changes. I might even close it. I would give you a phone call and I would be like, are you okay? Everything going okay? Like, is something going on? Like, you feeling okay? Like, this is not how we do things here, right? So let's do it wholesale. Let's do it the Vue way. So this is the same application as a Vue single file component. So in Vue, we have single file components. We don't really use JSX. If you use JSX, it is because you are doing something really, really weird, which happens occasionally. Don't get me wrong. I have used JSX to make things that are like really weird, specific utilities. You do not use it very much, though. Like, you have to really know what you're doing when you need to use it. There are other ways to achieve everything that you need to with Vue. So let's go over this. First thing that you'll notice is a script tag. Do you want to know why? It's because Vue is designed to run in the browser, right? First things first, so that we get this out of the way, a lot of the design choices of how the language works, how the templating part of it works, are there because it is designed to run in a browser. I could write all of this, change like 2 things, and it would work in the browser. So you can just like drop a script tag in and Vue will work, okay? So there's a lot of design decisions about Vue single file components that are based around this fact. And as we come up on them, I will explain them. So inside of our script tab, we have our imports and everything like that. The next thing, though, that you'll notice is that I'm doing our define component here, but I'm not passing a function. I'm now passing an object with a setup method. So this is how we define our component, usually in Vue. This allows us to define props as well. You have a props property that you can put on there. You have an emits property, which allows you to define like events that this component might emit. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do with like the options that you have available to you, but we're just using setup for this one because we don't need to do anything too complex. A lot of this stays exactly the same. We've seen all this before. We did this. I explained all this. I'm not going to explain it again. The big thing, though, that has changed outside of like being an object with a setup method is that now instead of a function, I'm returning an object with properties. These properties are what are going to be available to me in the template. So anything that you want available to you in the template, you return on this object from your setup function. If you want something available to you from the window, the global object, right, like console.log, you need to return console as a thing in this object to be used inside the template. If it is not in this object, Vue will not know about it at compile time, and it will throw an error. So that is the one sort of caveat. It's good because it's like nice like guardrails. Like if you try to reference something that isn't there, it's going to be like, I don't know. So that's good. Next up is our template. And you'll notice, look at that. It's inside of a template element. Now, inside of a browser, you can actually specify a template property in that define component and give it a CSS selector, so like an ID, right? And we can give this template tag an ID, and then Vue will know, oh, I need to go get this template element, use the contents of it as my template, and compile that. Now, you don't always get the Vue compiler. I will go ahead and say that as a caveat. If you're doing a build of Vue, typically it will remove the compiler element because it's already compiled all of the template stuff, right? So you have to specifically opt in to have the one with the compiler if you're wanting to do that, so that is not a default. So like if you go make a Vue project and then you're like, why is this template in my HTML not compiling? That's why. You've compiled away the compiler part. So inside of our template, also you can see down at the bottom, we'll come up to that I think, but you'll see down at the bottom there's a style tag. There's a style tag. We'll come back to that. So inside of our template though, you'll notice a few things have changed. So instead of using onSubmit, I have this weird @submit. In Vue, we use directives on elements. And part of the reason for that is, once again, because Vue can run in the browser, everything that you do to an element, to a component, whatever, has to be parsable by the DOM parser. The DOM parser, A, turns component names, like any element name, into an uppercase word. So camel case does not work in a browser. You have to use kebab case. So if you have a component, it needs to have 2 words so that it won't accidentally mix it up with a HTML element. So for instance, you can't just have a capital B button component. You have to have a my dash button component. And then the compiler will pick up on it correctly. When you are in a single file component, you can use camel case if you want to, because that is a different process for compiling. But in the browser, if you are just in the browser, it has to be kebab case, and you need it to be 2 words. So with our form, we have @submit, which is a view directive. Stands for v-on, : and you can pass it any event name. Is the shorthand because people got tired of typing 4 characters. They were like, why type 4 when I can type 1? So they made that. And we're passing it our submit function, which works exactly the same. And oh, you'll notice here, look at that. It says class. It says class, not class name. I just use HTML attributes. It's really great. It's really good. I don't have to do weird JavaScript things. Super fun. Next up is our input checkbox. So you remember before with the checkbox, we had to listen for a checked event. We had to then bind a value, right, to the checked property, right? In Vue, we have this lovely directive called vModel, where you say vModel, and then you pass it some sort of reactive value, and Vue goes, I got you. Don't worry about it, right? It figures out what type of input it is. It knows, oh, this is a checkbox? Great, it's going to be the checked event. We'll just add that, and then when it updates, we're just going to update the value of the checked, and then boom, 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 done, right? As opposed to like having to figure out like, oh, I'm on a select, so it's changed thing, but this is a text input, so it's the on input, right? Like you're not having to do that anymore. You just be like, oh, vModel, done. And it just automatically updates. Super handy shorthand. You can also do this for components. You can actually define your own vModel stuff on components. So if you want a component where you just vModel something to it, it's model value is the prop name, and then update : model value is the event name, and it'll just automatically do the syncing for you. Once again, super handy, super great. I love Vue. This is fantastic. And you'll notice, once again, it's the kebab case directive name, v-model, because we're in HTML land, and in HTML land, everything gets turned either uppercase or lowercase depending on what it is, because they're super inconsistent about things. So it's easier just to add an extra dash in there and be like, I know what this is. Problem solved. You can also make your own directives. That's a whole other talk, but it's really fun. Anyway, next up we're going to have our list. So remember before our list was like a map and then it had a bunch of like weird stuff to make it work. In Vue, you just put v4 on your list. And you say to do in filtered to dos, right? And you'll notice I'm not using .value there. It's because Vue recognizes filtered to dos as a ref. And so it goes like, you don't need the .value. We know what you're talking about. Except in weird cases, in which case you do, but we're not going to get into that. So we're going to do to do in filtered to dos, and then we're going to give it a key of to-do.id, because you do still need that in Vue. Like that's not just a React thing. That's a Vue thing too. We're all like, yeah, tracking elements is difficult. Move on. The next thing also is our button. Instead of it being a weird like ternary thing or like a weird like Boolean like show archived or whatever, right? We're just going to go, hey, if show archived or not show archived in this case, then it will remove that DOM element when that is not true. Okay. We also have another event handler here of @click, right? Because we want to listen for a click handler. And then this is the part where people get cranky and angry, is that in Vue, you use double curly brackets to interpolate a value in text. This interpolates it as text. So if you have HTML in those values, it's going to be text. And it will make your angle brackets be angle brackets, and they're going to look like angle brackets. If you want to put HTML into an element in Vue, you use the v-html directive and pass it the value that you want, and it will put that as inner HTML. We don't call it set dangerous. This is actually the one place where I think React got it right. We don't call it set dangerously inner HTML. I think we should. Y'all got that one real right. I was like, I'm pleased by that one. But we have a way to do that as well. And the last thing that you'll notice down here is a style tag. Oh, I have a style tag. A style tag for our styles. Oh, how charming, right? And it has this fancy little keyword on there, a little attribute called scoped. Guess what? That entire CSS file is now scoped to this one component. It will not affect anything else. Done. I don't have to do anything. That just comes by like having view. Like that's great. It's great. You want it to be Sass? You do lang equals SCSS. Now it's Sass. Problem solved. You want multiple style things? Some of them Sass, some of them CSS, some of them less, some of them stylus because you're a masochist. You can do that. It's fine. Yeah. So there you go. That is our view component that we have done. We're going to go over a quick recap real quick to make sure that I didn't forget anything. So the first point of this recap is I want to make sure that we are all aware that React and Vue really are more similar than you think, right? At the end of the day, we're all front-end frameworks. We're all dealing with reactive values. It's just how we're dealing with those reactive values. The second point that I want to make, and I haven't really made this throughout the talk, but I'm going to make it now because I have been like just utterly rude and mean to y'all for the last like 45 minutes, is that you should use the tool that you like. If you like React, if you're comfortable with React, use it, right? Like, I think that Vue is the better technical choice, but I recognize like, I'm not gonna sway you with this talk to rewrite your entire enterprise application with Vue. No, like go use the tool that works best that you're using, right? Like I'm not gonna be a mean jerk about that. The last thing that I really want you to leave this talk with though, because I feel like it is the most important point I can make in this talk, is JSX is a templating language, and you should really remember that. And if I hear anybody calling it, oh, it's just JavaScript, I'm going to be like, no, it's a templating language, and I am empowering all of you to correct people on that as well. That is my talk. Thank you so much. I would also like to give a big shout out to Narando Johnson for helping me make the order of the slides a lot better, and Cassidy Williams for looking at my React app and being like, and fixing a few things for me. Slides are at the QR code as well as the link. There are more resources on this page as like comparisons between React and Vue. And yeah, that is my talk. Does anybody have any questions? I also have JSX as a templating language stickers, if anybody wants to pick one up after the talk. Yes?
Do you have like a React Native equivalent?
So there's a few different options. I know that like Ionic has a view layer, so that's an option. If you want to go talk about Ionic, go find Mike, he's here. Mike or Cecilia, I think, they're both here. And they can do the like view to mobile app style stuff. I know that there's like native script or something, I think, that was like an attempt at doing that. This is one of those spaces where I know that there are people who are actively working to solve that as a problem in like multiple ways. And I don't exist in that universe enough to have accurate descriptions and pros and cons of each, right? I don't tend to make mobile apps. Usually if I'm working at a company, there's like mobile app developers who are making the mobile apps, so I tend to not deal with it. But I know that there are solutions that do exist. So those are sort of the two that I can think of off the top of my head. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, go for it.
Is Vue an SSG or SSR?
So, yes, you can make, there are static site generators for Vue. There's VuePress and VitePress, which are really geared more towards like documentation. There is Nuxt, which is has a SSG mode. There is also, Nuxt is also sort of like the predominant server-side rendered Vue version. It compares very much to Next. So it's the one where it's sort of like, if Vue is not enough of a framework, Nuxt is like, no, but really you need to do things this way. And really like enforces like where you put things and stuff like that. So yes, there are options there. There's also always Astro, which I love. So, you know, but Vue is very much like, there's also Gridsome, but they haven't updated. That was more like Gatsby, but they never got to version 3 of Vue. They like stopped at 2. So yeah, that's sort of that. Any other questions? Yes.
So I've been doing React for like more than 5 years, and then this year I started doing Vue, and not to downplay Vue, but I think Vue 2 has a much like less steep learning curve. That was able to pick it up pretty quickly. But Vue 3 introduced the whole reactive and ref, and you know some people are like, well, you can use REST for arrays and objects too. So I just use REST everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's an added complexity now. Because yeah, you got people that's like, they're gonna switch, they're gonna use both, and then you got people that still only just use one. Like, everywhere. What do you think about that?
I think that you should do what works for you. There are places, like typically, so the question is like, which is better, using like refs everywhere, using reactive everywhere, mixture of the two? Which one's the best? And it's be consistent. The code base that I'm currently working on is refs everywhere. And I'm planning on changing some of that because we have some things where it's like, I need a consistent interface that is not a ref. And I know that it'll be a consistent interface. So it's one of those where it'll be easy enough to be like, when you see this, it's going to be a reactive object. Anything else though is a ref. And that's sort of my philosophy. The reason I don't like refs is the weirdness of the dot value when you get into the templating part gets real weird real quick. And I am not a fan of that. Yeah, that's sort of the short version of that. But yeah, use what works for you. And most of the time, once you get into really big applications, you need to bring in like Pinya or Vuex or something like that anyway to handle like more global state type stuff. So it becomes a thing there. Cool. Any other questions? Yes?
What's your favorite Vue 3 library other than
Vueuse. Vueuse, hands down. Oh my gosh. Speaking of Anthony Thu, he helped develop the Vueuse library, where if there is a thing that you can't do with a composable function, so we call it y'all call it hooks in React world, we call it the composition API in the Vue world. And so instead of hooks, we call them composables. The reason for that is that Vue actually has like lifecycle hooks that we call hooks, and calling everything a hook would be just like doubling up on names. So we call it composition and composables. And Vue uses a collection of composables that are like, just do everything. Like if you're like, oh, I want reactive values that are the current position of the mouse, there's a composable for that in Vueuse. Oh, I want to know the current size of the screen as a reactive value. You can do that, right? Like it's all of these things. Anything that you might actually like really, really want, they probably have made it already. Even with like, okay, cool, I have a local storage value that I want to stay in sync with local storage. There's just like an easy, like quick wrapper for that in Vueuse, where you're just like, make this into a thing. And it's like, okay, now it's a thing. And you're done. So yeah, that's my answer to that. It's a good question. Vueuse is my favorite utility, like library for Vue, because it fills in like all of the gaps that you have where you're like, oh, I wish it did this thing. It does it. So first thing that I npm install. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
What kind of data fetching library do you use?
Fetch.
I don't like. I know that with Nuxt they have. I think they're using ofetch because it sort of does the like back end front end wrapper of like if we're in the back end use whatever node fetch or whatever, and then like in the front end it'll use fetch. But like typically I use fetch. And I say that. Actually, what I do is that typically I'm writing like a wrapper around fetch, and then I have a library that I like called, that it's not Vue specific, called OA Zap FTS, which is a jumble of letters. But what it does is that it will take a Swagger file for a REST API and turn it into API call functions and provide type definitions. So if you want TypeScript safe, accurate to whatever your Swagger definition is, TypeScript files, that is the library to use, because then I just make a wrapper around that like does all the reactivity stuff and says, you're gonna get a fetch function. Whatever comes out of that fetch function goes in a reactive value. If there's an error state, it goes in this reactive value. Here's the current pending state. Here's a bunch of helpers to figure out like if we're in a pending state or a resolved state or a rejected state. And I just like make that object. And then anytime that I want to make a fetch call, I just like go, okay, cool. Here's the fetch handler. Now I have a bunch of reactive stuff, and I can call that fetch handler, and it'll deal with it. So it's that's another library that I really love if I have a Swagger definition file. So that's my answer there. Cool. Yes?
But do you prefer Pinia or Vuex?
Pinia. I liked Vuex. The problem with Vuex is that you have to, it is easier to register all your modules up front. So with Vuex, it's like Redux, but better. And that's not me saying that it's better. I have never used Redux, but the people that I explain Vuex to, they're like, oh, that sounds so much better than Redux. So with Vuex, though, you can have like modules, so you can have the different things, and you have like submodules and all of this. Problem is that you have to like load all those up front, and there is a way to dynamically load and unload them, but it is such a pain in the butt. With Pinia, you can basically be like, okay, cool, this is gonna have Pinia. Here's all my stores over here. Like I'm just gonna define a bunch of stores, and then when you need a store, you just import it and you use it, and it'll only bundle that as it'll correctly code split all of that, so that you're not having to like figure out how to like dynamically load and unload a module in Vuex. It just sort of handles it magically in the background with Vue magic. That's generally what this hand wavy thing means. So yeah, I like Pinia better. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yes. So cool. Anybody else? Brilliant. I have stickers up here. Thank you for coming to my talk.